Welcome back to Let's Talk to Animals, the podcast all species can enjoy together. My name is Shannon Cutts. I am an animal sensitive and intuitive, a Reiki master practitioner, and an animal communication teacher with animallovelanguages.com. And for our purposes here today, I am also your friendly neighborhood hostess and guide through the wild, wise, and wonderful world of interspecies communication. Call me crazy, but I truly believe that animal communication has the power to save, heal, and restore our planet for all species to enjoy and share. When we learn to communicate with one another, we begin to realize we are so much more alike than different. We care about each other. We become friends. On this podcast, we talk about what the animals have to say and share, and why our pets truly are our partners, empathic friends, and teachers. I am so glad you have joined us here for this fresh new episode of Let's Talk to Animals. So let's dive in. Hi, Shannon here. Welcome back to Let's Talk to Animals, the podcast all species can enjoy together. And on the docket today, we are going to dive into one of my favorite topics, and it is also the topic most likely to be asked if I am chatting with somebody casually about what I do, which, as you can probably imagine, is an interesting conversation. If you're just standing around, you're chit-chatting with people, and they happen to ask you, so what line of work are you in? And at the moment I say animal communication, I am likely to get one of a few different garden variety responses, one of which is kind of a blank stare, like, I didn't quite get that. Could you repeat that? Number two is some kind of a joke. Well, I ask my pet all the time what they want, and they always say, feed me. The third is a response of genuine curiosity. It's also the rarest, but when it happens, it makes my day. Tell me a little bit more about that. What exactly does that mean? How does it work? And I can always tell when there's this upwelling genuine interest. And that gives me just the opening I need to dive into one of my favorite topics. And so that's what we are going to explore today here on Let's Talk to Animals, is what I call the fundamentals of animal communication. So in other words, if you are even the slightest bit animal communication curious, if you have had what I call breakthrough moments, where you have maybe sensed or felt or simply known that you were engaged in some kind of a two-way information exchange with another being who didn't happen to be a Homo sapiens, whether it's a wild animal or an insect or a domestic animal belonging to someone else, or maybe one of your companion animals, but you didn't exactly know why it happened or how it happened or what to do to make it happen on purpose, or even what within you had any kind of ability to be receptive to some kind of a communication like that. And what's so interesting, those of you who have been listening for a while, you may know a little bit about my personal path and story about how I went from hiring animal communicators and believing with every bone in my body that it was a gift that only a special few got and there was no way I could ever do it. And then one day woke up and discovered that this was something I could do too. And that set me on my path of formal study and practice. And here I am today hosting a podcast called Let's Talk to Animals. So if you're not familiar with the details of my story, I've recorded several episodes about how I became an animal communicator professionally and the unfolding of that process. And I've talked in many different episodes about some of the things I've gone through along the way. So you can have those episodes to look forward to after we conclude our chat here today. But one of the things that I noticed looking back over my history of how I went from hiring animal communicators to hosting animal communication sessions for pet parents and their animal loves is I noticed that I actually started preparing for my formal course of study in animal communication long before I started learning animal communication, long before I even had any inkling that I might learn or study or practice animal communication one day. I was already in the preparatory stages. And I was doing very important work and laying a firm foundation for a path that I didn't even know was unfolding yet. And this is one of the reasons that I wanted to share this episode with you, is because it can be really hard for us mentally to go from I can't do something to suddenly I can do something. And yet, for so many of us, there's already a natural interest in, or even formal study in, the general vicinity of animal communication that makes us a lot more ready than we realize we are to take that leap and embark and start talking with animals. And so I figure if you know this, if you start to recognize this as something I did not know was happening in my life and I did not recognize. So if I can kind of give you that insider information, then it might help you feel a little more confident and actually prepared and braver to say yes to learning animal communication for yourself and for the conversations that you want to have with your pets that truly only you can have. So, what did I do? What were the activities and the studies and the hobbies that I was already engaged in that were laying this firm foundation for me? Well, number one, I happen to be a lifelong learner. I'm a book nerd. I spent 10 years as a freelance writer, much of which was in the pet niche before I started learning animal communication. So I was already expressing and acting on the three most important fundamental traits of any successful animal communicator, which was I was noticing, wondering, and getting curious about the world around me and the other beings I share it with. I was already so fascinated. In fact, if I look all the way back in my life to date, one of my very favorite things to do as a child was watch nature shows. The most well-known nature show that was on the air at the time when I was growing up, I'm in my fifth decade of life to date. So this is going to both date me and hopefully make me feel like a new friend for some of you who hail from my era. But one of the most popular and best, in my opinion, nature shows that was available when I was a girl was Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And I watched that show every week and I was just fascinated. And I talk a lot more about what watching that show every week taught me in the free webinar series that I offer, Intuitive Development for Pet Parents. So if you have not attended that webinar, that's kind of like the next step after this episode. And I offer them pretty regularly. So you'll just have to head over to animallovelanguages.com and get on my email list. And that will give you the update for when the next series of webinars launches, if there isn't one running at the time you're listening to this. So that show was really key for me in a lot of ways. But for our purposes here today, what mattered most was that I was naturally curious, not just about my companion pets at the time, but all animals. I was also really curious about my own species, and I spent many a blissful hour hiding myself in the self-help, self-improvement, and new age sections of our local library because I wanted to understand what made me tick. And I was looking for some kind of manual to explain all the different facets of me beyond what high school biology was offering up. My feelings, my thoughts, the intersection of the two, my body, my mind, my heart, my consciousness or soul. I remember not even really knowing what to call it back then, but just kind of sensing that there was something that made me breathe, that made everybody breathe. And I didn't know what it was. In fact, for those of you who are Star Wars geeks like I am, the closest thing I could find to that was this concept of the Force, fundamentally benevolent or at least neutral energy running through and connecting all being and all of life. So I was constantly looking for my version of the Force. And I was pretty relentless. But truthfully, I've always been like that. I'm an introvert. You don't have to be an introvert to be an animal communicator or to be intuitive. But if you have a lot of free time on your hands and you happen to be an introvert, it can make it a little easier to just stick your nose in a book. And there are lots of great books out there. There are lots of great movies out there. I was such an insatiable adventurer and explorer of the inner landscape. And I was always noticing things that didn't seem important to the adults around me or even to my peers. Subtle things like body language and tone of voice and expression and just all kinds of little nuances that I could sense they were there and they were important, but I didn't know why. So I was on this constant search, noticing, wondering, getting curious. And I talk about this a lot more inside my animal communication student program. But it is a hallmark of all great adventurers, explorers, engineers, inventors, researchers, groundbreakers, pioneering thinkers, because it stretches us into the realm of imagination, which is a gateway to intuition. So there is something to be said for recapturing the gift and the skill of noticing, wondering, and getting curious, and allowing our natural curiosity to lead us into new adventures, into a rekindling of our ability to imagine, not just so we can manifest more money, a better life, a life partner, whatever it is that we want that's on our bucket list or our to-do list, but as an exploration worthy of embarking on simply for its own sake. Both imagination and intuition share a pathway through the subconscious mind, which relates to the right brain hemisphere, which relates to an entire module inside my Animal Communication Adventure to Mastery student program, where we talk about why we have two different brain hemispheres and what each one is supposed to be used for. And so for our purposes today, because that would take us down a completely different path, just know that encouraging yourself, giving yourself permission to notice, to wonder, to get curious, to daydream again, to imagine as if, to play with things like manifesting something small, like finding a penny on the sidewalk or your dog licking you right on the nose when you get home. Those are building blocks to something bigger and more cohesive that in time can turn into a bona fide interspecies conversation. How cool would that be? Maybe pause this podcast episode right now for a moment and allow yourself to wonder, notice, get curious, and imagine as if you're having a two-way interspecies conversation right now. That's excellent practice for actually doing it. The next thing that has been really helpful for me, and again, those of you who've been following my journey and this podcast for a while, you may be aware that earlier in my life, I had a significant struggle with mental health. I had a very serious issue with an eating disorder and cyclical depression and anxiety and even panic attacks. And it took me a good 2 decades to claw my way out of that mess. And along the way, I added huge variety of coping skills and tools to my Homo sapien life survival skills toolkit. And one of those skills that was so essential that serves me well to this day is I had to learn how to notice when I was having an emotion number one. And I had to be able to name what that emotion was, number two. And for most of us, just the way that we are educated is we're not encouraged to feel, we're encouraged to think. And again, I go through this in a lot more depth in my Intuitive Development for Pet Parents webinar series and the student program for animal communication. But for our purposes today, just understand that nothing in your background, education, and workplace training for most of us really encourages tapping into, tuning into our feelings. In fact, for most of us, feelings are treated kind of like an inconvenience. And that's where we can even see manifestations of things like toxic positivity or codependency, where we literally give all of our power away to others to shape our reality, almost feel or think or act for us. There's a lot of fear that comes along with that. From my perspective, there's zero judgment because, as I mentioned, my recovery was pretty grungy and I had to go through a lot of self cleansing and detox and adding a lot of new skills to my toolkit just to survive myself. And one of the most valuable has been being able to notice when I am having a feeling and to name that feeling. And this is vital for anyone who wants to boost your intuition, and especially for anyone who wants to have animal communication conversations. Because when we get into the realm of communicating with nonverbal language, which is the language that all of the non-Homo sapiens in our world use to communicate, then we must be able to feel. And even more, we must be able to identify what we are feeling. So this is a great place to start, especially if you can identify with some of my story and you feel like sometimes you're either blocked in the area of feelings, or you maybe feel like you only have a very narrow spectrum of feelings, like you only feel really angry or sad or numb, or you won't let yourself feel anything except for positive, optimistic, happy. And again, zero judgment. I lived for years in these places. So you can especially notice if you feel like you only have maybe a little bit of a narrow range of even emotional sensitivity. Maybe you feel like you're just kind of flatlined. Like you just, sure, you feel a little bit of happiness. Maybe you feel a little sadness. Maybe you feel a little anger, but there isn't that intensity. So that's something to notice, wonder about, and get curious about, and play with, and begin to feel where the feelings happen, the emotions happen in your body. Emotion is nothing but energy in motion. So it's a form of vibration. I had one animal communication student who was really struggling to make progress in her depth of conversations with animals. And so she asked me if she could set up a private coaching session with me. And when we started working together one-on-one, she shared with me that she didn't feel. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me why it is that you believe that you do not feel? And she said, because emotions come from your heart, and I never feel anything in my heart, in my chest area. And as it turns out, like so many of us, because our emotional education is minimal, if not altogether absent as we're growing up for most of us, she did not realize that emotions can manifest anywhere in the body. They can manifest in the form of butterflies in your gut, or a headache, or a feeling of euphoria that floods your body, or nausea, or backaches, or hunger. For some of us, if you've ever headed to the refrigerator when you sensed a feeling coming on, you can certainly relate to that. Some of us head away from the refrigerator when we can sense a feeling coming on. And that has a lot to do with our individual set point of hormones, hormonal messengers like serotonin and norepinephrine and oxytocin and dopamine and all kinds of other good hormones that regulate our emotional lives and our attempts to moderate and modulate those. So feelings can manifest in the form of behaviors like stress eating or not eating when you feel stressed or sleeping too much or manically exercising. There are all kinds of ways that our feelings can flood through us and lead us right into certain actions. So that's a good way to start becoming your own feelings detective, is to notice what I call patterns in the chaos. If you notice yourself doing a certain thing again and again and again, and especially if you feel like you're a little feelings repressed or feelings blocked, you can start to trace that back and begin to notice, well, what happened just before I went for my fifth dog walk of the day, or I took another nap, or I headed to the refrigerator again? Start to notice, was there the inkling of a feeling there? And if so, can I challenge myself to get curious enough to notice what feeling might it have been? And to identify that, you can take one more step backwards and notice what happened just before you felt that inkling of a feeling that flooded through you in the form of energy and motion and sent you right to the refrigerator or the bicycle or Netflix to numb out with another binge watching episode. So backtracking a little, this is something I did daily when I was recovering from my eating disorder. I didn't really have the option of formal treatment. So I had to kind of do it yourself with books and mentoring. And I kept a journal and I would track back what happened first and then next and then next that led to this unwanted outcome yet again. And as I started to get better at catching myself in the act before the pattern got rolling and took me for a ride yet again, I started to notice my emotions and how my emotions were triggering all the rest of it. So if you want to be able to communicate with animals, you must be able to feel and identify what you're feeling. And this is the pre-work. It's going to be an awfully tough journey if you embark on a formal course of study and practice in animal communication and you're not able to identify what you're feeling. So not only is it going to just help you to feel better and function better in your daily life, but it's going to make you a much quicker study if you decide that you want to learn animal communication. You also have to be in your physical body, because fundamentally, animal communication is a nonverbal language, as I mentioned. And so if we are not in our bodies in this present moment, and then this next present moment, and then this next present moment, we are not going to be able to hold a conversation. So animal communication does not tolerate things like texting on the side or looking around and noticing who just entered the room, who might be more interesting to talk to, or getting lost in your head about whether you need to stop at the store on the way home to make the kids dinner or what's brewing at the office tomorrow morning. If you're not right here, right now, your animal communication partner will not tolerate it and they won't stick around to have a conversation with you. One of the quickest hacks for how to be in your body and stay in your body, surprisingly, actually has to do with how you listen. So when we're trying to text on the side or we're secretly running through our to-do list in our head while we're engaged in a conversation with someone, we've essentially left the conversation. We flatter ourselves, or at least I flatter myself, that I can multitask in that way, and I actually really can't. People that think they can multitask and say they can multitask, they just get really, really good at switching back and forth between different types of listening styles very, very quickly. In the same way that any animal communicator that you work with who tells you, well, I hear the animals talking to me just like you're talking to me now, that's not actually how it happens. They've just gotten really, really good at the art of translating the nonverbal into the verbal. And that's why I take the time inside Animal Communication Adventure to Mastery to break down for you exactly how it does happen for all of us, using a strategy that one of my mentors calls slowing down to speed up, so that you understand every single step from start to finish. And then slowly but surely, you can start putting all those pieces in place, practicing the process, and then you speed it up over time as you get better and better and braver and more confident until, yeah, sure, it does feel like the animals are talking to you in your head in words, just like people do, but they're not. So we've got to be in our body. And there are 5 keys to being in your body. And I'm going to address the most important and the most overlooked one first, which is how we listen. There are 3 main types of listening. The first 2 are societally encouraged, if not outright enforced. This is what the Toltec shaman and best-selling author Don Miguel Ruiz calls domestication. It's how we're educated. Again, it's also how we're trained. We're trained to either already know something, as in, I could regurgitate that on a test and get an A any day of the week and twice on Sundays, or we're encouraged to either agree or disagree with something. And those are the 2 types of listening styles that are taught. We're taught to listen until we identify something that we know, and then we're like, good, I'm good, check, go on to the next lesson, and we leave the conversation. Or we're taught to identify what we do agree with and what we don't agree with. No surprise, our society is so polarized today. And then again, check, done with that, leave the conversation, go on to something else. The third listening style is the only listening style that will work if you want to have an actual conversation with an animal, one where you're not making up the animal's side of the conversation in your head. And it does happen. And this is one of the handy hacks to work around it. You've got to actually listen, which means you have to actually stay present in each moment, which means you actually have to notice when your mind, your left brain mind, is trying to sneak away and multitask, and remind it, we can't multitask. We can only do one thing at a time. And right now we're having a conversation. So let's do that. The mind wants to think. So if you tell it, think about this right now, it will. If you don't tell it, it's going to try to sneak away and think about something else. That's just the nature of the mind. There's a whole nervous system related reason for why our minds act the way that they do. And that too is very important to understand. But right now we're just laying the foundation. We're just getting acquainted with what is needed before we even embark on an animal communication learning journey. And this is one of them. Noticing, how am I listening today? Am I listening to know something and check it off the list and move along, as if that's the only important thing that I'm here for? Am I noticing to agree or disagree with what I think I already know, and then I'm going to move along? Or am I listening to learn something new? Because if you're listening to learn something new, listening to learn more even about something you already know, then you're a good conversation partner. And here's the real fun part. You're not just a great conversation partner for the animals, but you are for your fellow humans as well. And that's the wonderful, the most wonderful, out of many wonderful things about learning animal communication. This is one of the many most wonderful, which is that it makes us a much better human animal in so many ways. So listening is the fundamental, and it's the one that's most overlooked. But there are also 4 other keys to staying in your body. Number 1 is how we breathe. And you might be listening to that going, oh yeah, I already know that. You might even be listening to that and going, I don't agree, or yeah, I agree with that. Okay, next. Let's stop and learn something new, because there are all kinds of ways to breathe, aren't there? It's one of the reasons I included an entire animal-themed breathwork mini course inside my Animal Communication Adventure to Mastery student program, because there are all kinds of ways to breathe. There are breathing styles that will keep us stuck in sympathetic nervous system mode, fight, flight, freeze, tend, or befriend. There are breathing techniques that will move us into parasympathetic nervous system mode, rest, digest, and reconnect. There are breathing styles that can influence our emotions, either extending emotions or snuffing out emotion. There are breathing styles that can lead us to optimal health, and breathing styles that can make us sick in body, sick in mind. So noticing how and how well you breathe is key to being in your body. I always joke with my students that oxygenated cells are intuitive cells, because cells that are struggling to get their fair share of oxygen are not going to be interested in sending and receiving neurotransmitters that help you decode nonverbal intuitive messages. So if you are not breathing deeply and fully and making sure that every single cell in your body has plenty of air and is on board to help you with your learning journey, you're basically cutting short your own potential needlessly. Think about how you feel when you're struggling to breathe. Are you interested in having a conversation about anything other than oxygen? Probably not. And the same thing goes for hydration, which is number 2. Hydrated cells, as I remind my students, are happy cells. We are anywhere from 60 to 90% water, depending on which body part we happen to be looking at. And our planet is, I'm not exactly sure the percentage, but it's at least 75% water. The animals we want to talk with are also largely made up of water. So if our cells are dehydrated, they're probably also struggling to breathe at that point. They're full of toxic waste, and they have other more important matters to attend to than pay attention to our animal communication learning goals. So staying oxygenated, staying hydrated are the 2 most important keys. The other 2, this is also not rocket science. You need to move your body and you need to rest your body, because our bodies have this groovy waste removal system called the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is kind of like the shadow side or the little sister to the circulatory system. And the circulatory system has this pump called the heart that keeps all the blood flowing, and ideally the oxygen and the water and all of the nutrients and everything, keeps it all flowing, making sure every cell has everything it needs to do its job optimally. The lymphatic system does the same for waste removal, but unfortunately, for whatever divine design reason, it doesn't have its own inbuilt pump. So if we want our lymphatic system to move, we need to breathe, drink lots of pure, fresh water, and move our body. When we move our body, our lymphatic system gets pumped. So we are literally the pump for our lymphatic system. And after we pump, 20, 30 minutes, 5, 6 days a week is usually pretty good. There are all kinds of ways to do it. I am not someone who is qualified to give lifestyle or health guidance. There's lots better resources for that sort of thing than listening to Let's Talk to Animals podcast. But just find a good set point for you where you're getting some movement every day, ideally. And then you need rest, because rest and sleep is when the body repairs itself and sorts out your short-term and long-term memory and catches up on all kinds of processes that we don't even know are happening. And so you need a balance of movement and rest. There is, even though we're not engaged in any kind of Olympic sport here where we've got to be, muscled and toned and all that good stuff, at some level, we have to have a baseline of good self-care if we want to have the deepest and most beneficial animal communication conversations. We can have animal communication conversations anytime in any state of health. So really, for our purposes here today, for this episode, I'm talking about really optimizing everything. So don't listen to this and think, well, if I'm not doing all of this, I'll never be able to have a conversation. That is far from accurate. But we're talking about if you want to optimize your conversations and you want to have consistency, and especially if you're working your way through it and you feel like you're struggling to have consistency, these are just some areas to look at. And if you're animal communication curious, but you're really hesitant or you just think, I just can't do it, these are some easy preparatory steps to take that don't require a whole heck of a lot of extra energy or investment or courage from you. It can very gently and naturally lead you up to the starting gate. So I just want you to think of it like that. So in the same rate, the way that we nourish our bodies, the types of foods that we eat and the quantities that we eat, and paying attention to whether the foods that we eat are agreeing with us or not. If you've ever had an upset tummy from something you ate that didn't agree with you, and then you went and tried to have a conversation with anyone about anything, you might have noticed it was a little hard to concentrate. Same thing holds true when we're really thirsty or we're really tired. So it's just about optimizing the results, the outcomes of the conversations that we're having. The final thing that I want to share in terms of ways that you can start preparing for embarking on your animal communication adventure, whatever that looks like for you, is to notice how your body moves. And here I'm not talking about physical fitness or exercise. This actually has more of a tie-in to emotion, and I'm going to share a little story that will explain what I mean by that. When I first met my soul bird, Pearl, Pearl was with me for 24 years. I have recorded several episodes about our amazing journey and our amazing story. I've also written a book called Love in Feathers, What a Palm-Sized Parrot Has Taught Me About Life, Love, and Healthy Self-Esteem. He was with me for the grungiest parts of my mental health recovery journey. He is the animal who led me into animal communication, and he is now back with me in his reincarnated body as Miss Petal. And when I first met Pearl, I had just lost my 3-year-old cockatiel Jacob in the most unexpected and catastrophic way. And I was in deep grief. Any of you who are listening who have been through something like this, you can just imagine how I was feeling. And I did not want another bird. What you need to know about me is I have wanted a bird in my life since I was 7, and I have kept company with birds nearly nonstop since I was 8. I seem to just crave avian company the way I crave oxygen. And so it was tearing me apart to be without Jacob, and it was tearing me apart to be without a bird. And I just did not want a bird. And one thing led to another, and my mother intervened and dragged me to a PetSmart, and I met Pearl. And when I walked into that PetSmart and I saw all those baby cockatiels, my heart almost broke, and I was on my way to turn my body around and leave when out of the corner of my eye, I saw this miserable little clump of gray and white feathers. And without even thinking, my right hand stretched out right in front of Pearl's little body. He jumped on my hand, ran up my arm, and hid under my hair for almost an hour. And I remember whispering to him, "You are the pearl of great price. You are love with wings." And that was that. I have a whole episode on exactly how that happened and the whole story and the book and the blog, and then how animal communication was a natural outgrowth of all of that. So you can enjoy that episode at another time. But in that moment, my body knew something that my mind didn't, that my heart was feeling but wasn't willing to accept, and my mind didn't have a clue, but my body knew. And of its own accord, it leaned forward, reached out my right arm, and Pearl jumped on and ran up my arm and sat on my shoulder. And it was that fast. Today, we might call that an example of applied kinesiology, muscle testing, or using your body as a form of dowsing or as a pendulum. So this is where I want to leave you today with something really fun and interesting to play with. This is another precursor to formal animal communication, to intuitive development. Notice as you're making decisions how your body moves. Most of us, even as I'm just standing here now recording this episode for you, my heart is open and calm. My energy is high. I am enthusiastic. I am excited. I'm having a good time talking with you. And my body is naturally leaning forward. Now, my posture and my body movement looks a lot different when I'm not having a good experience in conversation or when I'm experiencing difficult emotions. I tend to naturally lean back, and I even tend to move my body just like I was trying to do when I first met Pearl. I was trying to move my body to the side to minimize contact and protect myself. I was trying to move away, but my body was trying to move me forward. And this is subtle, it's nuanced. But if you can just start to notice, wonder, and get curious about how your body is moving itself as you're having conversations, as you're making decisions, as you're meeting new people. You may have had experiences where you just felt like as you were meeting someone new that you just automatically liked them and you wanted to get to know them better. Or maybe you have had experiences where you've just decided, I don't really want to sit next to that person for an hour at this conference, or I don't really want to get trapped in a conversation with that person. Well, in addition to noticing those thoughts, start to notice how your body is moving, and you'll start to be able to detect simple things like a physical yes and a physical no. My physical yes is a forward motion with my body. My physical no is a backward motion with my body. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, you can see me demonstrating it for you right on the video. But you may have exactly the opposite, or you may notice that your body moves to one side or the other. There's no one right or wrong way to detect your yes and your no, but we all have them because we all extend energetically, electromagnetically beyond the boundaries of our physical skin. That's how many of us have had experiences of knowing someone staring at us, even though our back is to them. We can sense their energy and their focus on us. And there's lots more to be said about that. But in closing today, for your little fun homework assignment, just start to notice how your body moves, how your body is moving just before you make a decision, or as you're meeting someone new, or when you're feeling a little lost and clueless, or when your energy is high versus when your energy is low, or you're being given an opportunity. Notice how your body moves. And this is actually another simpler and subtler form of communication. Our bodies communicate with one another. Our minds communicate with one another. Our hearts communicate with one another. Our energy communicates with one another. Our nervous systems communicate with one another. So this is where I'll leave you today. I hope you will pop a note in the comments or leave a review and let me know what you're noticing and what you're learning and how these tips are supporting you, whether you are looking out onto the horizon and thinking, I'd like to learn animal communication someday, or you're inching yourself right up to the starting gate right now. I remember that day well myself when I finally took the plunge and enrolled in my first formal student class and how nervous and excited I was. Maybe you're already on your path. I would love to hear how these tips help and support you. And I'd love to hear your questions. What else are you curious about when it comes to the animal communication learning journey, developing your whole body present moment awareness, unwrapping all of the gifts and pathways through which your intuition can work, communicating with all different kinds of animals from all different walks of life in all different life stages and even in spirit. What questions do you have? And we can find a time to chat about them together in a future episode of Let's Talk to Animals. So thank you again for tuning in today. It's been my honor and joy to be your guide through today's episode, and I send you all my love. Okay, bye for now. I have so enjoyed sharing this episode with you. If you're new to the Let's Talk to Animals community and you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave us a review on your favorite streaming service or drop a comment wherever you like to listen. I love to hear from you, and your feedback truly helps me shape future episodes based on your interests and needs. If you're not already in my weekly Love Letters community, head over to animallovelanguages.com to opt in. Your welcome email will include $25 off your first pet session with me, and you'll be the first to know when a new podcast episode drops. If you're interested in learning more about the work I do communicating with animals, offering pet Reiki, and teaching animal communication, please visit me at animallovelanguages.com. Click on Schedule for Pet Sessions and Programs for all the information about my new Animal Communication Adventure to Mastery student program and the live animal communication practice circle I run for student practitioners. And I look forward to welcoming you back here very soon for a fresh new episode of Let's Talk to Animals. Okay, all my love. Bye for now.